Allen Company and Big Al will be at the I-80 Truckers Jamboree. See you there.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Reddick.
If you've noticed what a mess emergency declarations can cause on the state level, you're not alone. Now, lawmakers want FMCSA to make things more efficient. Tyson Fisher of Landline Magazine explains. A lot of questions around insurance can pop up when you lease onto a motor carrier. We sit down with Trina Skywalker and Lisa Waskey of OOIDA's Truck Insurance Department to discuss what is typically covered and what you should add on to your policy. Truckers and enforcement officials have had an ongoing disagreement about the use of personal conveyance. I'll go over where things stand now and what could be next with Tom Crowley and Aaron Lynch of OOIDA's Compliance Department. And finally, CARB emission regulations have not only upset truckers, lawmakers in our nation's capital have voiced heavy concerns about them as well. I'll find out what they've done about it from Bryce Mungen of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. And now, here's Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. You hear it pretty often here on the show and read about it on landline.media when a disaster strikes and states issue an emergency declaration, creating a patchwork of declarations that can create some relief from hours of service requirements. But there is a new effort to make some changes on that, and joining us with the details is Tyson Fisher, Associate Editor of Landline Magazine. Tyson, always good to see you.
Yeah, pleasure being back.
So we've got dozens of Republican members of the House here signing on to a letter about this very issue. We're going to get into, of course, what they're asking for here, but let's get into the problem that caused them to band together and reach out.
So, yeah, anytime there is some type of emergency, and when we think of emergencies, it's mostly stuff like natural disasters. So let's take hurricanes, wildfires, stuff like that. When this happens, states often state governors will have a declaration of emergency. And in those cases, it allows truck drivers hauling for relief efforts. It waives the hours of service. It allows them to get to where they need to be quicker. That's kind of the idea. The problem that we've been having over the past several years is that sometimes those emergency declarations are not soon enough or not wide enough in scope. So it kind of causes some issues for those who want to provide relief for these emergency efforts. And so that's kind of what some fuel haulers specifically have been kind of raising that issue, because they're the ones who are the most impacted by this. I think that would be the highest sought after commodity in any type of emergency. Kind of reached out to lawmakers, and lawmakers listen, and now they're telling FMCSA, let's do something.
Yeah, and this is an example of, again, reaching out to lawmakers,
right.
and it does bear fruit sometimes. I think it does help that we've got Congressman Mike Bost on this letter, and actually Congressman Mike Collins as well. Both have a connection to trucking through their families or through themselves, actually, directly here. But again, they are joined by, I don't remember the number exactly, but dozens of other members of the House here. And essentially, they're asking for action on this. I guess as we look at solutions here, what does that look like, I guess, is the question.
There's 2 points that they're trying to make here. The first one deals with the timing of these emergency declarations. So oftentimes, there's two types of emergency declarations. Usually the ones that are provided by the state, which is usually followed by or around the same time, one from the federal government, in this case FMCSA specifically, when it comes to hours of service and waivers and stuff like that. The issue is the timing. So usually the state declarations won't happen until maybe the day of the emergency, sometimes a day or two after the emergency has occurred. And the same thing with FMCSA. The only problem is if you're hauling for these emergency relief efforts, you kind of need to know ahead of time, or you need those hours of service waivers ahead of time so you can get there in time and you can provide the fuel or whatever else when they need it, which is when the tragedy strikes. So what these lawmakers are asking is that whenever it's feasibly possible for FMCSA to issue these emergency declarations at least 5 days before a reliably predicted disaster of emergency. So in the case of a tornado, that's obviously not going to happen because we don't know how those work.
Sure.
Hurricanes, on the other hand, we know about those well in advance. So that would be a great example for how this could work, which is basically what these lawmakers are saying. Say, hey, FMCSA, if you know that there's a major hurricane coming at least 5 days ahead, go ahead and blast off that emergency declaration. That way, these fuel haulers or whoever else can get there by the time this hurricane strikes, and then there's going to be no delay in getting that. So, yeah, the first issue there being timing. And then the second thing that they're looking at is just kind of like the scope, the geographical scope of these emergency declarations. So a problem, again, is that usually these are state-by-state declarations. So, if there's like again, hurricane, good example. If one strikes, in the East Coast, Florida will have their emergency. Then you'll have one in Georgia.
Yeah.
But you have to wait for each one. But let's say you're in South Carolina and you're a fuel hauler, you don't have one. There's a patchwork that we talked about. What the lawmakers are asking FMCSA to do, which is just go ahead and send an automatic regional relief, not state by state. Don't give one for Florida or Georgia. Do like a southeast regional declaration of emergency. That way, it just will take care of everyone in one fell swoop. Again, because sometimes not a fuel hauler providing emergency relief, they may not be, based in, like, let's say, Georgia or Florida. It might be South Carolina or somewhere nearby, Alabama or whatever. They're going to need, to be covered by that HOS waiver, too, if they're coming from those other states. A regional declaration of emergency will take care of that. So, again, it's a timing issue, geographical issue, and it's just to make sure that anyone who wants to provide relief during these emergencies can do so in a more timely, efficient manner, which the way it currently works, it's not terrible. It's just it could be more efficient.
Yeah.
And that's all they're asking for.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a long list of things that could be more efficient. And this is one of them, too. I guess the question here as we kind of close it out here, Tyson, is FMCSA, does have the authority to do this, to declare regional emergencies. And this is a letter to the acting administrator there at FMCSA because we still don't have a confirmed one. I guess the question is, are they going to bite on this? It is something that it seems like it would be relatively easy for them to do, and we don't know the question or the answer to that question, obviously. But you wonder if they're looking at this and thinking, is this really a safety issue? I don't know.
I don't know why they wouldn't. It's very reasonable.
Yeah.
I don't see anything controversial about this at all. As you pointed out, this requires no changes in regulations or authority. This is something that FMCSA can just do at the drop of the hat. They can change that policy because it's a policy issue. It's not regulatory at this point. It is a policy of that. So, very easy to do, non-controversial. I wouldn't see why they wouldn't do it. So we'll just kind of just wait and see if they do. But again, I think it's reasonable, and I would like to see this get done. Yeah,
it's one of these things. Again, it seems like a no-brainer. It makes sense, and as you point out, it wouldn't be that difficult to do. We'll see if it actually happens now is the next step. You can read all about the letter that Tyson and I just talked about and be in the know about all the latest emergency declarations over on our website, landline.media. Tyson, we appreciate your time as always.
Thank you for having me.
And Mark, back to you.
Thanks, Scott. Congratulations to Brian J. Peters of Bellbrook, Ohio. He's received the OOIDA Safe Driving Award for 39 years of safe, accident-free driving. That's the equivalent of a car driver going 293 years without causing a single accident. The OOIDA Safe Driving Award program is sponsored by Shell Rotella. And if you're interested in receiving the Safe Driving Award, you can find a link to more information at our website, landlinenow.com. Next, Ashley Blackford discusses leasing on and insurance with Trina Skywalker and Lisa Waskey of OOIDA. We'll be back in just a moment. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Penske is the trusted source for quality used trucks. Whether you search our website, call our sales staff, or bid at our online auction, you are sure to find the right used truck for your business. Visit PenskeUsedTrucks.com to view our inventory and learn more.
High heat and low lubricity can break your diesel fuel down fast. Summer driving means crowded roads, more stress, dust, and a bigger risk of costly engine damage. Howe's Diesel Defender protects from the inside out, cleaning, lubricating, and fighting injector wear. Visit howsproducts.com.
With rising costs affecting everyone, switching to a genuine Vibertech TVD viscous damper can help you avoid expensive repairs and downtime. Save money and keep your truck running smooth with Vibertech TVD. Recommended replacement at 500,000 miles or 15,000 hours.
Landline Now, welcome back. Like tires, fuel, and an engine, insurance is one of those things you just have to have for your truck. But not all insurance is created equal. Ashley Blackford is here with the experts from OOIDA's Truck Insurance Department to answer some questions.
Thanks, Mark, and hello to Trina Skywalker and Lisa Waskey with OOIDA's Insurance Department. How are you doing today, ladies?
Fantastic.
Great. Wonderful. Today, we are talking about important information when it comes to leasing onto a carrier. What is someone who's in that situation? What are they responsible for when it comes to insurance?
Well, it depends on your lease. In most contracts, the motor carrier is going to provide your main coverages, the primary liability and cargo, and then they may make you responsible for physical damage, secondary liability like bobtail, or other stuff. You just need to make sure you read your contract to know exactly what they do and what you're going to need to do.
Well, and quite honestly, if your contract says that you're responsible for primary liability, then it's not a compliant lease. I mean, it's, that's one of the factors of a lease agreement is they are mandated to provide that coverage for you. And so any compliant lease is going to say that they are carrying that portion of it.
And when it comes to the lease, insurance companies, agents, are they going to delve into your lease to see what you need, or is that your responsibility?
Typically, it is your responsibility. Most insurance companies aren't going to, but I think we're the exception to the rule.
I was going to say we would.
Yeah. If they call us and they're not sure, they can send it to us and we'll look it over and make sure that it is compliant.
Well, and we are asked to do that sometimes. And honestly, it's, business services really has a knack for looking over various forms of contracts to see if they're compliant and whatnot. But, we've looked over a fair few in our time. And, we've gotten to the point, the tenured folks like Lisa and I have gotten to the point where I try. It sounds better than old.
Yes.
Yeah. We can kind of look into that and usually spot pretty quickly what it says you're responsible for, what you need to carry and things of that nature. But you're right. Most agents aren't. And it's better that way. A lot of them aren't trained on what to look for and aren't sure what to look for. So there's not a whole lot that can do that.
One-liners, because you get contracts that basically have one line in them. Those aren't compliant.
Oh, okay.
Usually.
Yeah, and usually those aren't even going to say much about what you're supposed to carry or what they're going to carry.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, if it's a 1 or 2 pager, it's probably not going to have all the factors.
Now, the motor carrier always obligated to provide the primary liability, but that's something you pay for, correct?
Yes.
That comes out of your. And what's important to look for on that as far as how much they're charging you for that?
Well, they cannot charge you more than what they pay. So it's important to look at that particular portion of it. And, we've found that some companies aren't going to charge you a dollar and cents amount. They're going to just charge you a percentage. And that's going to be your escrow, your insurance, all that entails. And that's kind of, I hate to call it a loophole, but it is how some of them kind of get around that factor, because instead of saying, well, you're paying $892.15 a month, for insurance, they're just going to say we're taking 15% off the top, 20%, whatever the case may be.
How important is it to look into that? Do you see oftentimes that people are maybe getting screwed over in that way?
Some are, yeah. So it is important. And if you think you are, if you're not sure, ask to see what they pay. They have the right to know what they're paying for and how much they're paying.
I'm glad you said that, because I was just thinking it's never a bad idea to ask for that proof. I mean, I say proof hesitantly because, it's always kind of a sticky area when you're asking to see, your motor carrier's financial, your bills or what have you. But also, if you're being asked to pay it, and again, no one's going to pay it for you. I mean, it's several $100s a month, if not, over $1,000. And so no one's just going to eat that premium. But it's not unreasonable to say, well, I would like to, if you're charging me $895.72, then I would like to see that proof. And some of them are pretty willing to share that information with you, and some aren't. We've seen over the years that if they're hesitant or kind of get up in arms about it, there's probably a reason.
Yeah. Now, so there's the category of what they provide and what you have to have. Is there anything else that you typically see other than primary liability?
Cargo. They should provide that as well, because most of the time the bill of ladings are going to be in the motor carrier's name. Some contracts do give the option of the owner-operator to carry it, but you want to make sure if that bill of lading's not in your name, it could cause issues come claim time.
Right.
What are some of the other things you recommend people get on that maybe are, I guess, considered extra but are important to have?
Well, I think we go into a lot of our sessions here. We get into towing coverage. And honestly, that's a good question to ask the motor carrier too. If there's an accident, especially a cargo spill or something of that nature, dig into what their policy includes. So they do have to provide primary liability. They usually provide cargo. What does that mean for you as far as cleanup and towing? If they don't have that extra coverage, are you responsible for it? Are they going to foot that bill? If they don't have the coverage for it, does your lease agreement say who's responsible for it? That can be a huge, huge, huge bill, tens of thousands of dollars. And so it's very important to check that out. Carry it on your own if you can, but ask them too.
See if they cover it, yeah.
This seems like something also you want to find out before the situation arises and you realize, oh, they're not going to cover that. Like, that is on me, right?
Wait until after.
Yeah. Roll the dice.
Yeah.
No, it's absolutely. We cannot emphasize enough how important it is to look into that out the gate, just because we've seen people lose their livelihoods over this kind of predicament.
What about secondary liability? What is that?
Secondary is something that covers liability, protection for the other person when you're not maybe under dispatch, or if you're using your truck for personal use. The motor carrier doesn't want to be responsible for you all the time. They want to know if you're just out joyriding, which I'm not sure you're doing that in your semi, but maybe, that you have coverage.
They do get really good fuel mileage. So.
Yeah. Why not?
Yeah.
If you hurt somebody in an accident, that you have coverage for that.
What about physical damage coverage? What does that cover?
Physical damage is going to be, it's basically like on your personal auto, you'd call it comp and collision. Okay. In commercial insurance, it's all rolled up into one. It's comprehensive and collision, so it's fire, theft, vandalism, things of that nature, damage to your equipment. And sometimes the motor carrier will offer to provide that for you, but then if your lease terminates, usually that coverage goes out the door with it. Same with the secondary liability. That can be bobtail, non-trucking, bobtail deadhead, regardless of which form you're carrying. We always recommend to have your own policy for that. Sometimes it is cheaper through the motor carrier because they can get a group plan or a package deal. And, finances are important. Saving money is important. And we totally get that. But also you don't want to be left hanging, when your lease terminates and then you have zilch.
You have no way to get your truck somewhere else because you have no liability. Now,
I'm curious, if a motor carrier says, we offer this coverage, do you have the option, and maybe it's different with every motor carrier, do you have the option to say, like, I'd rather just get it on my own, or do you have to go through the motor carrier, or does it depend?
Primary liability, you have to go through the motor carrier. They're the ones responsible for it because of you're using their MC, their DOT numbers. Cargo, typically, again, you're going to carry it through them. Other coverages should be optional. Most of them are going to give you that option, but a lot of them want you to carry everything with them because they want to know, you're running based on their name. They want to know you're covered for any and all incidents.
I mean, it would be a little concerning to me if they said you have to get your physical damage through us, because my first question would be why? How does it behoove you for me to carry my physical damage through you? I mean, it's your investment. It's your equipment that you're protecting. You want to have the say-so in your policy because you don't know if they're getting you a bare bones policy. You don't know if that policy has the extra towing coverage. What if you have a mechanical breakdown? What if you have an accident and need a rental? You just don't have the control over that policy that they're providing like you do your own, by calling around and getting your own quotes.
Yep.
That kind of speaks to the importance, too, of seeing the policy, right? And seeing what it entails.
Absolutely. Again, just to reiterate, knowing what you have covered, because if you roll the dice and get caught in one of those situations and then find out later you have $2,000 for towing, if any, and then you've got a $25,000 bill, if it's on your equipment because it's sitting in a tow lot for storage, your motor carrier is probably not going to pay it. Just because they're providing that coverage and taking that money out of your settlement does not mean that they're going to cover that added cost if your insurance doesn't cover it.
Right.
And maybe this was covered in one of the other coverages, but when it comes to bobtail, what kind of coverage does the motor carrier typically provide something for that, or is that something you should have on your own?
Usually they will offer it. Again, like Lisa said earlier, if the lease terminates, you don't have a way to get the truck home. Now, that being said, usually a bobtail policy is not going to cover you to get the truck home because their primary liability has to be in place. That's why we call it secondary, because it's second to that primary liability that they provide. And so if that primary isn't in place, the bobtail has nothing to come second to, and it doesn't work as a standalone. But some insurance companies, if you have the policy on your own, maybe have an option, maybe a clause for one trip, maybe a temporary coverage, a way to get you home. If you take it through them, they're not going to offer you that. They're going to terminate your lease and you're done. They're not going to say, well, you're not working out for us, but here's 5 days of coverage to get home. They're just not.
Yeah. What kind of questions do you hear coming in that people, when they do call for coverage, that they typically have? Are there any that you kind of hear over and over?
Most of them just want full coverage.
Yeah.
Which we typically, we don't have what we call full coverage. We'll offer your standard, your physical damage, bobtail if they're leased, or the non-trucking or the bobtail deadhead, and that can depend on your lease because some leases will say strictly bobtail, some will say the non-trucking. You want to make sure you know the difference between the two, and that's a question we get a lot is what do they cover?
I think that also speaks to the importance of, calling a company like OOIDA, who I assume people who sell, home and auto insurance, they're probably not well-versed in the trucking world, I would think.
You picked those words directly out of my brain just now.
All right, ladies, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our thanks to Trina Skywalker and Lisa Waskey of OOIDA's Truck Insurance Department. If you have any questions about insurance, you can call 816-229-5791. For Landline Now, I'm Ashley Blackford. We'll be back after this.
At Truck Stop, we've built a better load board for carriers like you. Sign up today and access over 600,000 loads on the most trusted online load board. Learn why the best in the business rely on Truck Stop to make more money and start driving your profit today.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
Firestone's FD694 drive tire for long haul and regional applications now delivers 126,000 more removal miles than the Yokohama TY517 MC2. Contact your Firestone commercial dealer to learn more.
Landline Now, welcome back. Some people are pushing for some changes to be made to the regulations covering personal conveyance, and it could spell trouble for you if you use that particular aspect of the rules. Here to offer some advice are Tom Crowley and Aaron Lynch of OOIDA's Compliance Department. Guys, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having us, Mark.
Thanks as always, Mark. Glad to be here.
Well, glad to have you here because this is one that just seems to keep coming back over and over. Before we get into some of the stuff going on here, what is the current regulation on personal conveyance? How do you use it properly under the regulations?
Well, actually, there's not a regulation on personal conveyance. It's the lack of a regulation. It is the fact that you can use your commercial motor vehicle for personal use. The FMCSA or DOT has no interest in what you do with that vehicle if you're using it for personal use. It's when you're in commerce that they're interested, and that's when the hours of service would come in. So personal conveyance actually comes back to you can use it for personal reasons, but it's the interpretation. Can you convince DOT roadside that it's for a personal reason, or are you furthering a load or furthering the business? A lot of people, drivers, if you give them an inch, they take a mile. We've heard that before. So if you allow personal conveyance and you allow them to move their vehicle under personal conveyance, you will have some drivers that say, hey, I'm just going that way to Walmart 300 miles down the road,
But there were some guidance, was some guidance put out, for example, that if you are unloading and you hit your limit, that you can go to the nearest safe, secure parking on personal conveyance, which wasn't really allowed before.
It was not. Yeah, if you run over your hours of service, you're 11 or 14, and you're at a shipper or receiver, and they require you to leave. Now, they must require you to vacate the lot. Otherwise, you're expected to stay right there.
Which does happen frequently.
It does. But if they require you to leave, then you can go to the closest parking spot. They don't say a whole lot about safe and secure or with facilities or with, anything like that. It's the closest parking spot. And if that happens to be in the direction you were going, that's fine. If it happens to be in the other direction, then you better have went the other direction. They do look at that. And then, as you were saying, there's some people looking at changing it. The CVSA has come out with a proposal that would limit the mileage and or hours available to use it.
Well, and as I understand it, they also want to get rid of that guidance on looking for the nearest parking.
Yeah, and they want to go ahead and limit the 2-hour personal conveyance to each day. That's one of the requirements they want to do it. They want to intend to reduce the incentive for drivers to use personal conveyance as a way to extend their legal driving time. They are also seeking to clarify terms like advancing yard moves, enhancing operational readiness. They also want to clarify, and the proposed change would mean that the time spent using personal conveyance would no longer be considered off-duty time. A former rule would be proposed to prevent owner-operators even from using personal conveyance to return or leave home if it serves a business purpose. So there's quite a few things that they are referencing here and changing. And is it all bad? No. Is it all good? No.
And let me say, because a couple of those items that you mentioned, we already know you can never run out of hours unless you're the shipper or receiver and they require you to leave. But just rolling down the road, you cannot run out of hours and go to personal conveyance to complete a run.
Yeah, that's already against the regulations.
That's already against the regulations. Everybody knows that. If you take these regulations, or if you take these proposed regulations and you put them in place, I mean, it's just another way to hog-tie drivers, to restrict their ability to use their truck for personal reasons. If you run out of hours and you're sitting at a truck stop and you need to go to Walmart to get some deodorant, you want to go do some laundry, go to a movie, go whatever, you should have the ability to use that without all these extra restraints being put on you. You know, personal conveyance, like I said, it is the lack of a regulation. But if you make it a regulation, one of the things Aaron's mentioned would basically be add another line to the logbook for personal conveyance. You know, no, personal conveyance is an off-duty move, and when you're off-duty, there are no logging requirements when you're off-duty.
Yeah. Well, and keep in mind that this could reference to hotshot, truck drivers that actually use their trucks on a daily basis for taking their kids to school for even,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they would have to drop down to that line 5 and put that they use the truck for, we just don't want to go there. I mean, I know where CVSA is on this. They're looking for ways to clarify and to, make sure nobody colors outside the lines. But, it's getting pretty petty, I think.
I also think one of the things that really strikes me here is that safe haven provision where if you are at a shipper receiver, I've actually been on the phone with a trucker once where he was at a receiver. He ran out of hours halfway through the unloading, which, by the way, took hours and hours to do. And they said, leave. And he's like, I'm out of hours. I can't leave. And that was before this went in. And they called the sheriff out to arrest him if he wouldn't move his truck.
And the sheriff will arrest you. I mean, because at that point you are trespassing. I mean, as a driver myself, I've been at AG where you've been to a grocery warehouse and it takes hours and hours to get that stuff unloaded. And then another hour or two for the lumpers to finally get your bills and get them into the office and the office to do their thing and get them back out to you. All right. So now you're over your 11 and or 14 and they say, all right, you got to leave. Well, we've had drivers that called in just the same situation, and where they push the issue, and somebody calls the sheriff, and the sheriff comes out and says, "You're going to leave, or I'm going to arrest you." You can't violate one law to abide by another. That's with folks that park on some of the ramps where it's against the law to park on a parking ramp. They say, "But I was out of hours. I had to stop." You can't violate one law to comply with another. And I don't care which one it is, you just can't do it.
Yeah, and we certainly understand those people that park on the ramps. Listen, we've got a immense parking shortage here, and I cannot repeat the figure enough that there's only one parking space for every 11 truck drivers out there. But let's face it, I know, for example, Indiana is very strict on that. You park on the ramps, they're hitting you with a ticket.
And it's not one ticket, it's multiple tickets.
And yet all these places still want all their groceries, clothes, everything that we deliver to them in life, yet we penalize somebody for parking on the ramp. And then we condemn them and have them utilize their money, their assets, and get sued if somebody hits them and gets injured or anything like that, and perhaps even passes away, and then they get sued for a wrongful death lawsuit and they lose.
Yeah, and I got to say, myself, I have parked on ramps and I have slept on ramps. It's not the most comfortable. They're not level. You end up sleeping upside down or rolling out of your bunk or something. It's not the ideal condition, but that just goes to show what another issue that drivers are up against that they have to deal with on a daily basis.
Let's go in the time we have left here to another one that's, I think, been confusing some people, and that is there's a lot of different records kept on truckers. And I guess folks are having some confusion here between the MVR, the PSP, the DAC report. Let's go through these one at a time real quick and just explain to people what these are and how they can affect you. And I guess the first one has got to be the MVR, the motor vehicle record. What is that?
Well, your MVR is basically your motor vehicle record, as you said. It's any tickets, convictions that you have gotten while operating a vehicle, whether it's in a big truck or a car or your motorcycle. If you got a ticket, a moving violation, it goes on your MVR. And keep in mind that under 391.23, I think it is, motor carriers are required to do a check on you, to check your MVR. That's one of the only requirements, that and your previous employers. But there are many other checks out there that can be done that most motor carriers do.
The next one down is the PSP, which you're talking about, when you're looking for a job, the PSP is exactly for that, the pre-employment screening program. And it's important here. MVR, as I recall, is kind of kept by the state. PSP is federal.
It is. PSP is federal, the pre-employment screening program, and that comes directly from roadside inspections and crash data. If you are a driver and you have roadside inspections, DOT, pulls you over and writes you a ticket, and on your inspection report, they list that ticket, speeding or whatever it is. That is stuff that goes on your PSP, or pre-employment screening program. Anything that's written on a DOT inspection report and or state-issued crash data. And keep in mind, a DOT recordable crash is there was a injury treated away from the scene, there was a tow of any vehicle involved, or a fatality. Those are what it takes to be a DOT recordable crash. And if that's happened, that will be on your PSP. And drivers don't know the difference. Some drivers don't know the difference in all these different reports. And there's more to go, I'm sure.
And crash data stays on your record for 5 years. Any kind of violations, roadside, stay on your record for 3 years. It's important to note. As far as that MVR goes, a motor carrier has to pull a 3-year MVR when they first hire you as part of the pre-employment process. And then every year after, on each driver, they need to pull a yearly MVR and then put it in their file for audit purposes as far as that goes. And I think the next one you're going to reference is probably a DAC report.
Yeah.
The good old DAC report.
The DAC report. Boy, I've been talking about this for 20-plus years. Well, let's explain to folks, because there's people every day that haven't run into this before, and they're going to run into it. What are we talking about here?
Well, a DAC report simply, and it confuses a lot of people, the PSP and the DAC report. The DAC report is on HireRight.com, and it is a report that carriers file complaints such as abandonment issues, things of that nature. Incidents, not accidents, but incidents are reported on there, and it's kept. Most bigger carriers will subscribe to this third-party website, and that's how they post the information on a driver to keep track of their history or work history.
Of their work history, and like you mentioned, incidents. If you're a driver and you call your carrier up and you was in a crash, right? Okay, that's a crash. That'll go on there. The carrier will report that information. But if you call them up and say, "Hey, I was tooling down the road and I think an owl flew up and maybe bounced off of my top of my truck or something," or whatever, they're going to put that down as an incident, something you didn't have control over, but it's going to be an incident that they can report.
Or like if you back into a pole or run over grass and the grass doesn't look good anymore, and a broker wants to file a claim against you for property damage, things like that.
Yeah, incidents, stuff that may not be in your control whatsoever. But when they look at your DAC report, it say, well, you have 3 crash/incidents listed, or accidents/incidents is the way it's listed.
And a DAC report will always be from a carrier. A PSP report is done federally by the DOT.
Okay.
The big difference.
Things to remember. And folks, we will put some links on our website, landlinenow.com, to where you can dispute information on these reports. And hopefully here, if there is something incorrect on there, you can get it fixed. But guys, we're out of time. I'd love to keep going on this one, but I appreciate the information. I'm sure some folks out there do as well.
Yeah, there's more to say on this one, so we'll have to do it again. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks as always, Mark. Glad to be here.
I've been talking with Aaron Lynch and Tom Crowley of OOIDA's Compliance Department. And folks, once again, if you have a problem, call them at 816-229-5791. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com, because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline Now. Welcome back. For years, many truckers have waited in dread for the next series of emission regulations from the California Air Resources Board, orders that affect truckers based well beyond that state's borders. However, those actions by CARB and other California officials have not only upset truckers, lawmakers in our nation's capital have voiced heavy concerns about them as well. Now, action has taken place that may spell an end to that process. Here to explain is Bryce Mungen of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. Bryce, how are you doing?
I'm good, Mark. How about yourself?
Very well, thank you. When I say CARB and regulations, that's like a book. So maybe we ought to start with what particular CARB regulation is in question here.
Yeah, no, I feel you. Anytime we talk about these, it's one of those things we know it's never good, but you still got to pay attention to all the details so you can figure out exactly what you're talking about here and how it's going to affect you. So the three different California rules that we're talking about are the Advanced Clean Cars 2 rule, Advanced Clean Trucks, and the Omnibus Low NOx emissions regulations. So those are the three rules that are still at play here in some way.
And one of the big concerns from the trucking perspective, as I recall, is that the Advanced Clean Trucks is one of those rules that would essentially push the industry toward the use of electric trucks, along with all the concerns that truckers have about electric trucks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I know you use that word essentially, and that's how we feel too. It's basically an EV truck mandate. So the rule would have required that 40% of Class 8 truck sales to be zero direct emission by model year 2032, and it would bump that up to 75% of Class 4 through 8 through by model year 2035. So California can turn around and say, we're not mandating any EVs. You just need to find some sort of technology that has zero direct emissions. But it's pretty much, electric, plug-in electric trucks that could satisfy that. So yes, it was essentially an EV truck mandate.
So Congress stepped into this recently with action under a law called the Congressional Review Act. Very briefly, if you can explain what that law is and what it's intended to do.
Yes. So the Congressional Review Act is basically an expedited process for Congress to consider and overturn rules and regulations, issued by the executive branch. What's important here is that it requires a lower vote threshold in the Senate. So it's a simple majority to get things through. So usually you need those 60 votes to kind of move things forward in the Senate. So it gives Congress a way to roll back different rules and regulations.
Okay, so this apparently now has passed both houses of Congress. The president has now signed this, making it official. But there have been objections, including from some of the government's own internal watchdogs, in particular the Government Accountability Office. What were their specific concerns?
Right, yes, and of course, nothing is ever that simple. So, I described the CRA, the Congressional Review Act process to overturn rules and regulations. The question that came up here is whether or not, these rules and how they were put into effect were eligible under this process. That's because the EPA issues or basically approves waivers for California to issue more stringent regulations under other existing laws. So the argument that people opposed this action made and what the GAO found was that these waivers should not, or they don't believe they qualified for the for consideration under the Congressional Review Act in this expedited process. So that's why at the beginning here I said, we're maybe mostly done with these, but there are already legal challenges we're going to see to this action by Congress to argue that Congress did not have the authority to consider these waivers under this rule, and therefore Congress didn't have the authority to overturn them.
Well, and that kind of brings us, as you mentioned, lawsuits. The reaction from California, and I think we all knew that they were not going to simply sit there in silence. Sure. But who has spoken out on behalf of California, and what is it that they've said in regard to what's happened here?
Yes. So California Governor Gavin Newsom and Attorney General Rob Bonta announced they'd be filing a lawsuit on this, which they did last week. And they're framing this as Congress and President Trump attacking California's authority to help improve their air, help promote clean air, and things of that nature. So nothing about this is terribly surprising. If you asked us a few months ago how this would play out, I think we'd have a pretty good idea of where this is headed. So it is interesting to see. Frankly, this is an interesting legal question. I don't know enough about it, and we'll have to see how this all plays out.
Yeah, and as I recall, the Congressional Review Act allows Congress to overturn rules. The question is a waiver for California a rule or not?
Yeah, exactly. It's that question. And then this, again, something I'm just not as familiar with, but how does it work when, Congress kind of deems something, the Senate considered whether or not they had the authority to consider this waiver under the expedited process, and they said that they did. So is a court going to step in and kind of regulate or manage what the Senate can take up under their own internal procedures? Are they going to find, this waiver doesn't match up to what's allowed to be considered under a congressional procedure, under the law? I don't know, and it is I think it's an open question.
So at this point, I know what a lot of truckers are saying. Okay, that's all great. That's all technical. What about me? What about my truck? What about what I'm allowed to buy in the way of a truck?
Yeah.
Do we have a clear picture of where this stands now, or is this really just a case that we've got to wait for the courts to work this out?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. Certainly we still have to wait to see how this plays out in the courts. And the other kind of weird, I don't know if it's weird, but the quirk with this is that the mandate falls to manufacturers, not dealerships, not consumers. So it's not strictly a mandate saying, you, small motor carrier, have to go purchase EV trucks. It's saying manufacturers have to hit certain goals as they're manufacturing trucks and putting them out there. So certainly in the immediate term and even kind of the relatively near future, I don't imagine there will be huge changes to what we see because, again, it was already falling more, at least initially, on the manufacturer side. Certainly as this played out and they pushed more out there, it would fall to everybody as, there's more EV trucks and trying to implement it. But I think it's safe to say in the near future, there shouldn't be any huge changes, and we're just going to see how the legal process plays out.
Yeah, and there's a problem, of course, with requiring manufacturers to produce a certain percentage because they're a profit-making business and they want to make what people want to buy. But if nobody wants to buy those electric trucks, what do they think is going to be done with them?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, it leads to weird situations where our large carriers just going to have to buy an EV truck to let it sit on the lot so they can unlock all the other diesel engine trucks that they want to use. It's and that gets back to the whole crux of this is if the industry isn't ready, if the market isn't ready with charging infrastructure, with, how do you, payload, all the other questions that we've raised, if the industry isn't ready, there's just no way to force it. It's just not going to work.
Just about 30 seconds left, Bryce, but I did want to ask you, this has had a real clear divide between the two political parties. Mm-hmm. If we see a change in charge in terms of who's in charge in Washington, could this just all go back to the other direction?
We will see. There was actually some bipartisan support for the CRAs in Congress, so it wasn't strictly a partisan thing. And I think it's also going to depend on how the legal process plays out because that's going to complicate matters too. I don't know. I think this is a more complicated issue than normal, where one administration can come in and can just change things. I think there's a couple different moving parts that leave it a little bit more up in the air.
Okay, more we could talk about there, including what about other states that have followed California and what happens to them? But that's for another time. But in the meanwhile, Bryce, thank you very much for the information.
Yes, thank you.
I've been talking with Bryce Mungen of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. That's our program for today. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow with more. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad.
A son.
A husband.
Wife.
I'm a writer.
Photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars. Fishing.
My kids.
Chrome.
And I am
a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us! Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.